Push the record. I'm going to push record. So if you don't want to say anything you want on recording, please don't say it. But anyway, welcome and thank you and welcome to another edition of the Commercial Real Estate Investing Mastermind. My name is Pat Gage and I'm going to be your host. And I'm with the Block G group. And we're a real estate investing firm here in Michigan. We currently own 188 units and we are mostly in multifamily. So we look for B and C properties in Southeastern and Midwest America. So we're also looking for passive investors that want a good and great return with the security of real estate. If that sounds like you, I'll put my information in the chat and you can set up a 30-minute free call with us. As well as you can also visit our website at opportunitycreator.com for more information. Like I say, the mission of this group and the reason we get together bi-weekly on Wednesdays at 7 o'clock is to give you the confidence to do your first deal. If you have your first deal, give you the confidence to do the second and third deal. In this room and in these groups, there's sponsors, there's people that have money, there's people, lenders, there's insurance people. So I applaud you for being here, but I also make an effort as well as to put your information in the chat. And the best way to do that is just put your name, your telephone number, maybe your LinkedIn, what you can provide and what you're looking for. So the group will know what you're looking for. And I'll show you towards the end of this presentation as well as how to download that chat, as well as you'll get a copy of it along with the recording link when I send that out tomorrow. So hopefully that gives you enough information to do that information. And again, networking is the key here. But tonight we do have a speaker who's been very gracious enough to give me his time and his busy day, and it's Brady. And you've seen, I'm sure, a lot of the emails and promotions has gone out with it. Brady is the founder of Ridgeline Equity. Brady holds degrees, and this is what impresses me probably most than anything. He holds degrees in mechanical engineering and engineering management. And he does real estate. So goodness gracious. He's a senior project manager for a global 500 company. He's managed large multinational product development programs. So the reason he started Ridgeline Equity is witnessing many of his industry losses of jobs of his people that he works with or leave their jobs due to market uncertainties. He sought out a better, more stable way of income. And he landed on, obviously, real estate. And tonight he's going to talk about his journey. He's going to tell us on what his focus is on Ridgeline Equity Group. And now he helps busy professionals invest in and build wealth through real estate. Brady lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. So he's not in the rainy weather of Michigan. So I'm sure it's probably sunny there where he's at. With his wife and 2 children. So I'd like to kind of give Brady a warm welcome and thank you very much for spending some time with us. And one last thing, folks, if the best way to do it, if you go up in the far right-hand side of your screen and in the view, you click on speaker view, and that will put into the big screen there, the person that's speaking. Obviously, it's probably me because I'm speaking, but when Brady starts speaking, he'll be the center of attention. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to be quiet and we're going to listen to Brady here, and we'll go from there. So Brady, it's all yours, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Appreciate it, man. And good to be here. It's the first time with this crew, so I see some familiar faces. It's nice. There's several crossings of network, I think, in this meeting, so it's always good to see. I'm going to put my info in the chat real quick, just so it's there. And you guys feel free to reach out to me whatever way you like. My email's in there. You can reach out via LinkedIn. if we don't get to some of the questions a little bit later on, just follow up with email. I'll try and get in touch with you. If you want to set up a quick meeting, that's fine too, whatever works for you. So a little bit about me. I think it's always interesting for me to understand someone's background because, I kind of, I hate to say it, but I get tired of hearing all these, these great successful people, which by the way, I'm not one of those, but you hear all these great successful people and you think they're walking on cloud nine. You don't realize they're just normal folks like us. So I kind of wanted to just start like with a quick story, background, if you will. I grew up in just, middle class, house, middle class parents. My dad worked in a chemical plant as an instrument repair person. And my mom was an RN until we were born, and then she took some time off. But I didn't have this background of go out and be an entrepreneur or be a real estate, investor. The closest I had to that was next door to us was my grandmother's old house, and we owned that property and rented it out, and so there was some side income there, but there was none of this. Go out and instead of investing in a 401k for your entire life and hoping it's enough when you retire, go out and really invest in real estate. There was none of that backbone, in there. So I did what anybody would do. We had a good engineering school in town, and that resonated with me. So I went and studied to be an engineer, and that's the path I took. And, subsequent to that, I grew up in Louisiana. I don't know if I said that. Moved to Orlando, Florida, where I started working for the company I'm at now. There was a few years off in between where I got laid off due to cutbacks and came back later. But in general, it's been a good company. I got no complaints. But, over the course of many years, you start to realize that, if you really want to do something different, you can't do what everybody else is doing.
It's true.
If you want to, if you look around and see the people that are there and they've been there for 20, 30, 40 years, then you know what to expect. But if you want something different, if you want to try and retire 5 years early, 10 years early, or even have a little bit of assurance that it's got to be more than just your 401k, then you got to do something different. And that was probably the trigger for me. By the time I bought my first house, I had already read, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and, the Richest Man in Babylon and lots of other business books and things like this. But that was probably the trigger, was just, thinking about, do I really want to guess about retirement?
That's true.
and that since that resonated with me, that's also kind of how I talk to investors as well, is do you really want to guess about retirement? Because I did the math, because I'm an engineer, and that's sometimes what engineers do, is we like to know the details. And I did the math on my 401k, and it was like, now that I'm on the spot, it was over 7%, but less than 8% return. And I did this math about a year ago. So it's not like it was right when I started. And this is the return since I started investing in it. And, it's not a bad return, certainly. But at the same time, I also remember the year that it took a 25% nosedive, and with those kind of things in your mind. And then, as Pat said, there was some uncertainty in the industry that I'm in a number of years ago. And it wasn't just at my company, it was across the board. I'm in the energy industry. And if you've been watching the news for the last 5 years, then it's going green. And unfortunately, I'm not on the green side entirely. So
you will be by hook or crook, right?
Everyone will be soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
But I wasn't nervous about my job, but it was that kind of Kickstarter that forces you to question, okay, is what you're doing really secure? Yeah. And I think everyone gets to that point at some point. For me, that was the trigger. And I'm still with that company. But for me, that was a trigger where you just started asking the question, is this going to get you what you want? And are you really willing to move to do whatever the company wants you to do? And that applies to any company that you work for. And so I wanted options. And so I started, I started looking more into real estate. I want to rewind a bit. When I was in Orlando and I bought that first single family home, I also had I got a roommate, somebody that was paying rent, help covering expenses and things like this. I put in a lot of sweat equity in the first home. It was barely called a home. It's probably more a shack with some walls and a roof as your first home.
But it was your shack. It was your shack.
It was mine.
That's the thing.
And every single wall was built out of cinder block. Most homes in Orlando, the outside walls are cinder block, but the inside are your typical. This one, every wall was cinder block, including the inside. So it was quite an experience. But I made a lot of money off, or for me at the time was a lot of money off of it. When I sold it, I rolled it into the next single family home, which was a better representation of what a home should be, but it also needed a lot of work to it. And so I fixed it up, and over the course, of renovating it and doing all of that on my own, also got married. So there were some life changes. And so that changed a bit of the planning, plus the market in 2008 took a nosedive. That changed more planning. And then we moved here to Charlotte after that. So now let me jump back to the trigger event, a couple of years ago, since I've been here in Charlotte. And with that, I went back to kind of my default from before. I saw, hey, my parents made some money off of this single family rental next door to them. I made some money when I had the renters in, my houses that I bought in Orlando when I was living there. So let me go do that. And I started looking into that. But quickly, because I've learned a lot more over the years than when I first bought my first home. And, part of that learning that I had to remember was, I really don't want a full-time or more than full-time second job, and that when I started looking a couple of years ago into single family homes, that was sort of the realization that I was getting, is that, man, I could get 50 properties, and, the management of those 50 properties is going to be a nightmare, because I'm going to need a lot of properties to make a decent income, to build up a decent amount of wealth over time. But the management of that's going to be a nightmare. So I started looking into small multifamily, and I hadn't bought anything yet. It was a journey over a few months that was single family, quickly realizing, man, wouldn't it be nice to have more than one source of income under the same asset? Okay, let's look at duplexes, triplexes, and quads. Mm-hmm. Super competitive pricing here in and around Charlotte where I live. But I still kept looking, built a small network of people that were kind of doing a similar thing, learned a ton. And then I kind of accidentally crossed over into commercial when I looked at a fiveplex. I say accidentally because I was just looking in the normal places everybody looks. But then I realized that it was 5 units and it was commercial, and I had no way to close on commercial because I didn't know anything about it, nor did I have a lender. But that accidental encounter with commercial was the second tipping point, I think, for me, in that when I realized I didn't know enough about it, I started calling around, started reading up more. I almost bought that property. We just couldn't we were just off on the price, and I went to somebody else. But that exercise forced me into thinking more about commercial properties and their advantages. And if it weren't for that, I'd probably own a few duplexes, triplexes, and quads by now. But it forced me to rethink, well, wait a minute, for this same reason of I don't want to do single family, why do I want to do small multifamily? And even beyond that, man, there's so many more knobs for me to turn in a commercial building, because I don't care what my neighbor does, I don't care how much value they have. There's so many more things in my control that I am responsible for and my neighbor's not, if their property doesn't look great, it's not the end of the day, it's not the end of the world. I mean, and if they're getting some rent that's lower than mine, well, it's not really affecting my value. And when I started piecing all these things together, that's when I really started to zero in and kind of go full bore towards multifamily. And keep in mind, up until this point, I hadn't bought anything.
But the thing is, it's good that you went through that evolution, right, as we call it, without spending money. Because I know a lot of people like myself, I had a whole lot of residential, and I had to learn that when I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing? And a lot of people probably in this call have done that. You did it kind of virtually, saying, okay, let's add the numbers. Okay, wow, I'm going to have to work. And that's good that you did that and kind of got to that equation or the answer quicker than you would if you had to liquidate, 50 homes and stuff like that. So that's interesting.
Yeah. And so it's interesting. It also took me a long time to get that property.
Yeah, but when you got that property, though, you knew that was, for you, right? You didn't, settle on a single family home or a duplex or trailer. You knew by checking off those boxes that, okay, this is the step I want to go in, and you dove in, right? So it was reassuring yourself.
Yeah, and I got a bit of an analytical brain on me, and so the underwriting I took to quite naturally. And also the concept of scaling, the benefits of, the economy of scale and all this type of stuff on the expenses and everything else. And so that helped a lot. I started looking at 10 units, 12 units, and so on when I first started thinking, to me, large multifamily at the time. And then over the course of a few months, I was making some traction, but I wasn't making enough, at least not in my mind. And so I hired a coach middle of last year, entered into a mentor program, really upped the networking game around that same time. And the main driver for a lot of that was, we all, whether we call it the same thing or not, we do some type of gap analysis, right? Where it's like, okay, I want this thing. The gap from getting where I am today and getting there is, well, I'm good at these things. What I'm not good at is these things. And so let me go figure out how to fill those gaps, And, through that kind of self-evaluation, I really started building out the network. I started a mastermind with about 5 to 7 people, and started meeting with them, going to as many networking events as possible. I still have a wife and kids and a job. And so it's, you gotta judge your own time. But through all that, you're putting in offers, you're meeting brokers are starting to take you seriously. I did have one broker once. I like to tell the story a lot that, he told me, hey, the only reason I'm talking to you is because of the referral that gave you to me. So,
hey, at least he called you back. I got people that don't even call me back. At least they're doing that,
That's right. So, but again, it was only based on the referral.
So now, let me ask you real quick. When you started looking for these deals and you kind of jumped ahead to the broker. So in what you're doing is you in your company, you're the person that contacts the broker and initiates that first contact. Is that kind of what I'm hearing is that part? Now, I guess, how do you do that with a full-time job? I mean, that'd be the first question I'd ask. I'm sure a lot of people are asking that. How did you work that around?
Yeah, I mean, you've if you got a W-2 job, you got to do the W-2 job. I mean, there's no, your integrity is worth more than the money you're making. And so, yeah, I mean, you owe them, that time and that effort. But, there is, flexibility as well, depending on your employer, so you can call people over lunch. You can, you can, for me, it's not so strict if I work till 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock, as long as I get done what I need to get done. So there's a bit of flexibility in the timing of where things lay in many people's jobs than there is in mine. I tend to work more than the minimum at anything I'm doing. So, that's not a problem for me to fit in what's expected at the W-2 and what's required versus, what, I need to get done on the side. Certainly there's not, 10 hours a day for me to do real estate.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it sounds like also you plan out what you're going to do too. That's kind of what I'm hearing too, is that, okay, if you got to make calls, then you take that lunch, you make sure that you take that break and maybe make 1 or 2 calls, like you said, not spend 10 hours, but maybe make 1 or 2 calls. And then it's kind of like planning. I mean, that's really kind of what you got to do.
Yeah. And when I was first getting started, and that's right, you got to plan it out. You got to figure out, and I've gone through many different iterations of what that plan looks like. Some at one point it was like, well, Thursdays is going to be my broker day, and Wednesdays is going to be this day, and those plans always fall apart at some point. But
yes,
because life gets
I think
in the way.
we all know that. But at least you have a target, something you can say, okay, I want to make 2 calls this week or whatever, and then that's what I try to do, is just you have to do something.
Yeah, and that's in the end what I do. So I'm a pretty big goal setter. I tend to look at 90 days, so a quarter, if you will, and try and figure out what's a good target for the next 90 days. And then on a weekly basis, I'll sit down and I'll say, okay, hey, this week, this is what I want to do. This is the most important thing that I have to do, but these are some other goals. I don't limit it just to real estate, because I'm not I'm not a singular, person, right? You've got family, you've got health, you've got job, you've got everything else. And I really encourage other people to do the same thing. If you're not setting goals, then you're really cutting yourself short, to be honest. Because without that, I quickly, can, get off track on lots of other interesting things that are completely unrelated to the things I need to do. And I mentioned earlier that I set up this mastermind group, and that's what the mastermind was for. Ultimately, was we would go over what's your goal this week and how'd you do on it and what'd you learn, and that was really the initial point of the mastermind when we formed it. It's since been, we've all kind of moved on, but that was the intent, and that habit is, I think, necessary, especially if you've got a job and you're trying to invest in real estate. You still need that focus. And I think even if you're a passive investor, I mean, there may be, I don't know if there's, people that aren't on the active side on the call, but even as a passive investor, I tend to tell people you need to set the target, and you need to figure out what is it that you really want, and what's it going to take to get there. Because it may not be investing in one deal a year. You may need to double down on that. You may need to make other sacrifices, and maybe you stop investing entirely in your 401k to get there, and you divert funds over to real estate, or you pull money from your 401k and put it in a solo 401k or something, but without actually knowing where you're going and how to get there, it gets pretty distracting. And then you look up a year, 2 years, 5 years later, and you're wondering how much more you could have done. And so goal setting for me is at the forefront basically of what I do. Thanks for, extracting that, Pat, from the conversation there.
I think that's important too, is keep focused and say, okay, like you said, especially nowadays we're all sitting in front of a computer. I mean, I've caught myself, on Facebook or social media, I'll just go in and check email. Well, 30 minutes later, I'm still doing it. And you're like, whoa, stop,
Mm-hmm.
It's just moving forward on my goal of, this many units or whatever. So interesting.
Yeah. Unless you have a reason to be on LinkedIn or your email, I would turn it off.
That's true. That's true.
But getting back to how did you fit it in with a full-time job? So I'm a runner as well. I do a lot of running. I enjoy long distance endurance type races. And when I got started in this, actually about the middle of last year, I realized I needed more time. And so what I did is I just gave up running for a season. And I'd already been in the habit of waking up at, 4:30 in the morning, 4:15, to go running, because that's the only time of day that I have to do that. And so I just maintained that habit. And so you asked, well, where do you fit it in? Well, you just figure it out. Not everybody's going to, wake up at that time, and that's fine. But I already had the habit. And so I just cut that habit out for a time until I could, build up enough systems in place and enough habits in place and efficiencies that I could add it back in later. And it took me a while to do it, but I think the challenge that a lot of people has is they look at it and they don't see the time, right? They don't see all the pieces. But if we look at where we're spending our time, generally you can find space, right? Mm-hmm. Generally you can find the time wasters. My kids like to watch, Wheel of Fortune at night. I don't know, whatever they want to watch. That doesn't mean that I can't be underwriting a property at the same time, and finding those kind of moments where you don't have to be active with the family while they're doing something, and you can also squeeze in time to do underwriting or whatever it is a big help. But also it forces you to think about, how can I reach? So I mentioned I reach out to brokers. That's typically how I find deals. So how do you reach brokers most effectively and personally, but with the least amount of time? And so, you find ways, I have a system in place where I can email, on an alternating basis, the same brokers with the same email, but it looks very personal. Not like it was sent from ActiveCampaign or HubSpot or something like this. But developing those systems and habits and talking with a truckload of people like the folks on this call, and understanding what they're doing helps you really refine, how can I use my time the best? And a lot of that came from networking and watching what other people were doing and either refining it or just doing what they were doing. So
have you found that during this pandemic that these Zoom meetings has kind of ramped up your networking?
Yeah, for sure. Because you can get on a call with, there's 50 other people on a call on some of these networking calls. To go and try and, you got to find them, right? Just like you'd have to find a meetup in town. But at the same time, you get a much more, well, I don't know if that's true. You at least get a diverse group of people on the call, with a lot of different backgrounds. And I think it's easier because you're no longer tied to a geographical spot, so the people you're talking to, they're networking as well, right? And they're in different groups, they're in different forums that are not geographically tied to your city, and so it's really it opens up a broader spectrum, of people. And when I started networking, I just tried to force the habit because, it's not always the funnest thing when you don't know people and you're, to put yourself out there and connect, right?
Yeah.
And especially, you don't know what they're going to expect. You're the new guy in town, right?
Yeah. That's true.
And you're looking at some of these other guys and you don't know them either, but at least in your mind, you're thinking, man, they have so much experience. They said that really smart thing. They could be straight off the street just like you. You don't know.
They just practice it in the mirror 2 minutes before they got on the call.
That's right.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
They don't think that, and that's true.
That habit of just forcing yourself that in these networking events, just following up with 1, 2, 3 contacts that you were connected with. Over time, you've got a list of people, and out of that, let's say 20, 30, 50, whatever the number is that you've connected with over the months, there's a guarantee that there's, a handful of people in there that you really connect with, and you can go start trying to find deals together and make things happen.
That's true. That's good. That's awesome. Now, we talked earlier, obviously, on the phone. Obviously, we know each other from a networking group, and you had said something. Do you want to get into the deal in Michigan? Because you had said something about that, and I said that's a great idea. If you want to transition over to that and kind of and I'm assuming it's the one in Michigan here. Again, if it's not,
Yep.
let me know. And let's walk through that. So you talk to the broker and kind of walk through how we got that. And maybe if you wanted to share the underwriting, I think people would enjoy that and get something out of that if you want to do that.
Yeah, we could do both. One is I can talk about the Michigan property, but then also, I guess my approach to finding deals,
Sure.
kind of the first
Sure.
cut at them and this type of thing. And the reason I say that is, for this Michigan property, that one came from a partnership. I didn't find the property. I didn't find the broker, but I knew the partners.